I welcome you all. I'll continue with my discussion about the taxation. You may recall that in last lecture I discussed about the fiscal policy and the use of fiscal policy in stimulating aggregate demand via multiplier effect. Uh, uh, in other words, what I discussed yesterday was how can government boost aggregate demand in the economy by making government expenditure or boosting investment, and that will have caused a multiple effect, a chain effect on the overall demand in the economy. And that effect is transmitted through multiplier. And the higher the value of multiplier, more will be the final increase in the income. So that is why it's a very powerful tool to affect the economic activities, or in other words, to adopt counter-cyclic. That is, if recession is there and government want to do otherwise to bring prosperity, or so that the economic activities get revived once again. And if prices are rising, inflation is raising its ugly head, then government can reduce aggregate demand, and it will have the same contractionary effect like expansionary effect of fiscal policy. So in today's lecture, I will further discuss about the principles, also known as in economics, canons of taxation. Entire discipline of public finance is there, which we as a student of economics we have studied. We deal with these aspects, like so the behind taxes, and you may recall that fiscal policy uses two tools mainly: the taxes and expenditure, government expenditure. So the tax is, what should be the underlying principle that should shape the taxation policy. That, in other words, the design of fiscal policy has some underlying philosophy, some underlying principles. So in the last lecture, I discussed about that, like a government's endeavor is to create a just and fair society where justice and fairness prevail. Same also find an application in the design of taxation system. The first principle is that the taxation system should be equitable and fair. Equitable and fair, not equal. Please understand there is a difference between equal and equitable. So equitable means that, I told you that there are two principles which govern it. One is called vertical equity and another is called horizontal equity. Vertical equity means that if there are two persons, X and Y, and they differ, let us say in terms of the income, they have different income, they should be taxed differently. If horizontal equity means that if X and Y are similar, then in terms of income, they should be taxed equally. And one of the implication of this principle is the progressive tax, income tax, where people who are higher income tax bracket, they are taxed at higher rate than those people who are lower tax income, and if below a certain level, they are not taxed at all. So then taxation system should also be efficient. This has been explained in my. Efficiency means that it should not have an adverse effect on work and saving. For example, if government, impose too much taxes, I think that, let me explain here, otherwise you will get distracted. All in brief. Efficient means that, the taxation system, for example, if tax is increased, let us say income tax or corporate income tax is increased. Now, it may have an effect on that if a large proportion is taken away by the government out of these taxes, it will discourage people to work. Because, for example, if you are already in highest income tax and you put further taxes, then if the additional income that accrues to you while working longer hours or working more, then the if chunk is taken away by the government, it will discourage. It will have a disincentive effect on the workers, on the people in general, and they will not be inclined to work more. And if higher taxes is there, for example, if higher corporation tax is imposed, then what will happen that a greater amount of corporate profit will be taken away by the government in the form of taxes. So less amount will be available for investment purposes. So that is why taxation system should not be that it should create inefficiency in the economy. Rather, it should encourage more work, more, and because if less amount is taken away, then people will have more saving available. And that saving may flow into capital market. Companies can raise funds by the issuing the corporate securities. They can mop up the saving. A little more amount will be available. So that is why taxation system is very important, because it causes inefficiency if it is too high amount taxes imposed. And in some cases, what happens that the government also discourages certain activities via increasing taxes. For example, there are certain products which create pollution. Now, government may impose higher tax to discourage these. So that may have a positive effect in the economy. So the idea is simply here, inefficiency simply means the taxation system should not act as a deterrent for more work and saving. And if it is so, then the people and businesses will not be willing to save money more, or corporation will not have saving that they can plow back or can reinvestment for further investment activities that can create more production, more jobs, and so on and so forth. So this is what we mean by efficiency, and it has been explained here in my slide. You can go through these things. I'll come back to this point in my later part of this. Then administrative simplicity. A taxation system should be easy to administer. That entire machinery is there, in taxation, the which is there, and that if taxation system is very tedious to interpret, the laws are very tedious, the rules and regulations are very tedious, it will be very difficult to get it implemented, and that will lead to more legal issues. And that is why the interpretation of the taxes, and that is why this explains why government, there is a government imposes that. For example, recently, sometime government, imposes some taxes without retrospective effect. Vodafone was, and then finally government has to pay this. You cannot implement a tax in retrospective. That is, in 2020, you cannot bring a tax which will be applicable from 2018, like this. So this is one thing which is very difficult. You cannot implement it, this kind of tax. And if you implement it, there will be litigation. And even if sometimes rules are given, you like this tax will apply to this thing, some specification of goods and all these things. And this is varied differently by, and that is why there are various cases which are pending in courts. And government, what happened that government undertakes out of court settlement for that. Government goes for out of court settlement. The reason is simple, that it will take a long time to settle it, and the cost of administering may be much higher than the revenue which you get. For example, if you set out to recover 10 lakh rupees, and in the process you spend more than 10 lakh rupees, then it's not worth undertaking. That is why recently government has come out with the guideline that the appeal will be made only if the claim is more than this amount. Not that you can, for a party amount, 100 rupees, 1000 rupees, 500 rupees, and like that. So, because the car legal fees. So that is why, and you know that what happened, what was the case earlier in India? The case that there was, it was a maze of rules and regulation of law, the taxation. And that is why the lawyers has, were the major beneficiary of that. They interpreted it, companies interpreted, and then the cases went on. So that is why slabs are also been income tax around 10, 20. Earlier there were many slabs. The tax was as high as 90% in some cases. The point is explaining inefficiency that if you are beyond certain level, 90% of the income will be taken over by the government. So it means that only 10% you will retain it. So not only 10, but there were many tax slabs there. So similarly, for like GST, which I will explain later, is that there were so many taxes there. So that is why a tax was brought in, which can encompassing or incorporates most of the tax. So this is the point of administrative simplicity, and it should be transparent. Transparent simply means that like the truth in advertising. If we pay to the government, and this one has a right to know who is paying what. So that is why if taxation system there is a cloak or a veil is there is a something hidden which is not transparent, opaque is there, then there is something wrong. So that is why the taxation should be very transparent, and if the citizen should know the amount paid by. It is not that you have right that you know about, but it can be made available, and that will ensure that efficient tax administration is there. Otherwise, if the system is hidden in some, and you cannot get the right information about that, then you cannot also hold the government accountable for that. Because if you are walking on the road, it is the citizen who are paying the taxes, and the government using that money for building all these. Of course, government is drawing upon other resources as well, but the taxpayers' money is being used for that. And then taxation system should be flexible. You are already aware of the business cycle. Business cycle is a condition where economic situation undergoes change. It is not always that economy is booming, high demand, high employment, GDP is high, and another thing. Sometimes it happens that there are certain causes, maybe internal and external, which bring about a decline in these activities. So that is why the taxation system should try to adjust, should be flexible, that it can take care of these fluctuations. For instance, if a tax is imposed, let us say corporate tax or a flat 10%, irrespective of the corporate taxes or income. No matter whether income is high or low, one will have to pay 10%, which is not just, because you know that if income is higher, then one has to pay higher. If it is low, so uniform taxation system and this kind. So that is why there are built-in stabilizers. The more profit companies generate, the more tax they will pay. It is not that you charge 10% irrespective of the level of profit, or 10% of income tax irrespective of the level of income. So, and one more thing is there in taxation system. Sometimes what happens that the taxation system may be skewed in favor of certain sections of society. I'll come back to that. Now you may ask a question whether modern system of taxation tries to incorporate these principles. The answer is yes and no, both. Yes, to a large extent, but there are there are some issues which we cannot call it purely economic relief. You know that after all, taxation are decided by the parliament, the MPs, parliament, and they are politicians. Politicians may sometimes, some lobby is there, some section, like for example in India, agriculture income was not taxed for a very long. What is the reason why? Because the farmers. Now, what about the rich farmers? Why the rich farmers are not taxed? You see that in all the places there are, it proved to be a tax haven. People, farmhouses, all the rich people, they have farmhouses and other, and because the agriculture income is taxed. So that is why sometimes, it happens that because there is strong lobby is there. So and for example, in corporation also, minimum alternative tax. In companies like Reliance, they paid no taxes for some years. So there are so many discounts available. If you invest there, then the tax allowance is there, this and that, and so on and so forth. So the modern taxation system is a compromise between the lofty principles of economics and the pragmatic compulsion of politics. So there is a pragmatic compulsion. The politicians want to maximize their chance of getting re-elected, and therefore it happens. And in India, you will not find people like, for example, wealth tax is lower than this. For example, Warren Buffett says that I pay lower taxes than what my secretaries pay. One of the richest people in the world, he pays lower because his most of the revenue comes from the wealth. He has invested in stock and other, and there it is taxed lower than the income tax. And therefore, his security, because his most of the income is from the current income, he is taxed higher than. So India, you will not find people that like UK, that 50 the richest people, they wrote a letter to government asking just to tax them more. And there is a strong lobby. For example, like wealth tax, there is a lobby which says that if you are taxing the investment and other things, then the money will flow to those countries where they are taxed lightly. So all these arguments, they are put forward to put it light taxes on such. And whereas the government find very easy to put a middle class, why the income tax is not slightly changed, as standard deduction was not increased like that, because government find that these are the salaried people and you can take. Whereas if you make heavy investment in these stock market and other, you are taxed. And moreover, other lobbies also there. That is a different issue altogether. But just I'll hint at, and we'll leave it to you to think about. If a company uses debt, you can take, the interest payment is tax deductible. Why equity? Whereas equity is in if you have to choose between debt and equity, then the companies may sometimes prefer debt because of the tax deductible. Also, it's also risky, becomes risky. When in the second semester you study corporate finance, this issue is called the mix of that. Again, there is a strong case. Why risk? Because equity investment is risk, introduces more risk sharing, whereas debt becomes is risky. But so in recent past there has been, because the no sound economic reason is behind that, but some historical reasons, some other reasons are there. So that is why it's always a compromise taxation system. Not it's not pure economics, but there is a political economics. So you can go through these things. Now I'll go to discuss about the types of taxes. What are the various types of taxes which are there? So taxes can be broadly, classified as a direct taxes or indirect taxes. The difference between direct and indirect taxes are that the direct taxes are those where the incidence on the people or entities on whom it is based. For example, if an individual X is taxed pass on to Y that you pay. If X a company XYZ company is there, this cannot pass on to another company ABC that you pay. The incidence is that is why the word direct is. And the example of these are income tax and corporation tax. The taxes which are imposed on individuals and their income, and the taxes which are imposed on levied on the profits of the company or corporation. Whereas indirect tax are those, they are not paid directly to the government. Like if you buy some goods, rate GST may be there, which may be which the seller may collect it and then it pass on to the government. So that is why the incident is not direct, that so that is why the word indirect is there. And another thing is that in economics, you say that, as I said, that you cannot pass on, it is called, you cannot shift the burden, shiftability, indirect taxes is not there. But in case of indirect taxes, for example, if government imposes 10% tax on certain things, let us say just an example. So and whereas in some cases, for example, if price is 100, so it will be price. Now the price will become higher. Also some of these, if they have got some cushion. So instead of, they can reduce price to accommodate. So that is why, and moreover, there are certain, like sometimes the rates are the goods and services taxes are low, with the input and other component are there. So that makes the cost of production cheaper. So now whether this change, reduction in cost of production will be passed on to consumers or not. That is why in the past, when the budget was announced, especially I can recall it, Dr. Manmohan, we expect that the producer to pass on the benefit to the consumer, not that they will continue with the same price. So that is why this is the reason. Some of the example of indirect taxes are sales tax, which is imposed on the commodity sold to final consumer. And please remember that if there is any good final, let us say car, which is manufactured, there are intermediate, the components which are there. Okay, intermediate, there are various components which are produced and assembled final car. This is the final. And then the excise duty. Excise duty, that what are there various components, and these components, let us say they are imposed a tax. They are called excise duties during the production process, manufacturing. And when the final these components are assembled, then they will be again subjected to. So that is why when I explained to you value added tax and mod VAT and value added tax, that maybe that various components which are there, for example, when it was produced and it will be used by the TV manufacturer, again it will be taxed, because the final price of TV will include the price of TV and other component. Now whatever taxes have been paid at various stages of the component which has already paid, when you arrive at the final taxation, you can take you can deduct it, or you can take credit for that it has already been paid. So excise duty is posed during and custom duties are on imports. If you buy something from the outside the country, that is incoming goods, then custom duty or tariff is imposed on those goods. Now, why I just explained to you this thing, because as a precursor to explain to you. Well, value-added tax is that, as I told you, again, if I take the classical example of wheat and bread, or other things, you can also take it. So various stages, and so the miller will convert it and like this. So the at each stage there is a value addition, from wheat to miller convert into flour, and then finally go by the baker in turn and converts into manufactured bread. Now this is the final price. If you do not take into account the taxes, then what will happen that the final price of bread will be much higher. But if you take into account the how much value has been added through this stage, and you put a tax on this, the value addition only maybe 2 rupees, and here let us say 1 rupee, just an example. So you put tax here. Or when if it is not possible, then what happens that at the final price when you are putting it here, tax, you take into account what has already been. In India, before the GST, that is the underlying principle value added tax, was introduced in India, then a modified value added tax was imposed in India, mod VAT, because it was not possible, record keeping and other thing at it. So what if the final, for example, at car manufacturers, produce the invoices and that that these are the components which had already been levied tax to this extent, so they can take the credit for the taxes paid, or they were reimbursed. For example, if the tax is just an example 10 crore on the total, then if already 8 crore has already been on the component, then government will reimburse it. Or if it is, or they can take credit for this thing. The only final tax will be 2 crore. Just so the reason was that you put a tax on tax, and that will finally inflate the prices, what we call cascading. And finally, in 1986, in order to implement value-added tax, mod VAT is introduced, and later on it gave it. Now, value-added taxes are of two types. One is based on some value, that is the value of, and sometimes value-added taxes are also imposed on size. For example, size of a car. If car is size, for example, earlier the cigar, if it was so certain size. For example, a big car is there, maybe more taxes, size, and both may be taken into account. So this is the spirit behind why the value-added tax may have a positive effect in the long run, because you avoid duty on duty, which we call that will inflate the final prices and like that. So, and this was finally implemented through goods and services tax. I said that in India, what happened there are various taxes, plethora of taxes, excise duty, this and that, state tax, sales tax, central tax, and this and that. So all these was subsumed in one, which is known as GST, which is the indirect tax imposed on it, a multi-stage, but it meant to be refunded to all parties in various stages of production. And it means that if any component has already been subjected to taxes, those parties will be refunded for that. So it's and because of that, it was thought that it will bring about more transparency. It will reduce the time taken, because that transportation costs, the trucks are standing at the gateway of various states and then subject to tax and other things. So all this, and GST has finally three slabs. The zeros where some are quantities which are not taxed, and 5, 12, and this subject to tax changes as well. Now there are some controversial issues like these, like petroleum product, alcohol, and they are not taxed because of a political reason, not for any economic reason, because they provide a lot of revenue to the state. Still they are out of the purview of GST. That is why you see that the petrol prices vary from various states, and similarly alcohol also. In COVID time, No, the shop, but the permission was granted for opening of alcohol shop because it's a revenue generator for the government, so not for economic. They are not for political and economic reason is also there because they provide. So they are left out of the central taxes and then the state generates a lot of revenue. Central tax is also there, GST, and then over and above that, the government imposes on this. So there is GST council, and then that takes into account the various because it's still evolving in India. We have not, but that with all the fanfare and other thing at the midnight, like we it was announced that, but it was the work of the previous government was also involved on that. That the first time, as I told you, 1986, and thereafter a committee was set up which will look into the GST regime of various countries, and then finally they suggested that we should go for this. Now, a question is about whether tax and incentives do, as I pose efficiency concept that discourages work, saving, and risk taking. Whether high taxes are incentive stifling, that is, people are discouraged, or corporations are discouraged. Actually, somebody has asked a question yesterday whether tax, as I said that the most of the thing which I discussed that it is to boost aggregate demand. What about aggregate supply in the economy? So what happened that in US in early 1980s, when Ronald Reagan was the Ronald Reagan was the US president. Then the school of thought came into prominence. The school of thought was known as supply side economy. The idea of supply side economists was that we should reduce taxes, and that will provide incentive for the businesses and people to work more and like that. And that economics came to be known as economics. And there was an economist whose name is Arthur Laffer. He propounded a curve which looks like this. Tax rate and tax revenue. For example, the idea was that if you increase taxes from, let us say, up to certain level, your tax revenue may increase. But beyond this level, if you increase it, tax will not, because there are two effects. One is mechanical effect. That if you increase taxes more, but beyond that, what will happen? That there will be behavioral effect. People will not work. Corporation will be discouraged. Because if the major part of that taxes are taken up with the government, so we do not work for the government. So the story goes that Arthur Laffer, the idea was, put forward by Arthur Laffer to advisor. It was David Stockton, advisor of to Ronald Reagan. His name was David Stockton. David Stockton was sent for getting brushed up on recent economic issues, where he met Arthur Laffer. Arthur Laffer said that in order to revive the US economy, government should reduce taxes. And the story goes that they were sitting in a restaurant and there was nothing available. So Arthur Laffer drew this curve to bring home this pan and napkins. So this idea, David Stockton came back and told Ronald Reagan that in order to revive the economy, we should bring down the taxes. And many of you may not be knowing, as some of you may be knowing, that Ronald Reagan was a Hollywood actor. He's this president. He worked in Hollywood during Second World War. He was at the time his acting period overlapped with this war, Second World War. So that the Hollywood actors, they are paid very high, and Ronald Reagan was also paid. So Ronald Reagan, picked up this idea. He said we should implement it, and he made a remark that I was also on a Laffer curve. It means that he said that when after working in True Film, I was in the top income tax bracket, and the top income tax bracket was more than 95%, 90%. So I decided that I will not work in the third film, because when you are working in the third film and more than 90%, 94% of income is taken away the government, then I went on holiday, enjoying holiday, because that there was not working in 90% of the income. So that idea was implemented. But supply side economics has also its limitations, how far it has. But this is the supply side economy and how the idea. Arthur Laffer was asked about this idea from who the from where he received this idea. So he said that I was that benefit of high taxation has got deleterious or adverse effect on the economy. But Arthur Laffer said that I received this idea from the thinker. His name was Ibn Khaldun. And many of you may not be knowing, he was a thinker. He has written a Muqaddama, which was translated by no less than Joseph Schumpeter, of very famous economist, who is credited with the idea of creative destruction. So his the history of civilization, he has written an introduction to that is called Muqaddama. So he received this idea from Ibn Khaldun. So that is why knowledge, nobody can claim monopoly to knowledge. The knowledge, advancement in knowledge takes place, one idea and then it further progresses. Now coming to the last part of my, this is from the our Indian Chanakya. What does he says that taxation should not be a painful process for the people. There should be leniency and caution while deciding the tax structure. Ideally, the government should collect taxes like a honeybee. We suck just the right amount of honey from the flower so that both can survive. Should be collected in a small and not in large proportion. This is just idea that if you are putting too much taxes, then it may create side effects which may not be good for the economy. Now, the last part of my talk today, I will just briefly discuss about some of the aspects. Let me see how much time is left. That yesterday again a question was asked that whether the expenditure depends on the taxes or not. Of course, the answer is yes, because that the as I told you that the fiscal policy every year is implemented through budget. Government come like this year's budget, and budget is a statement of the revenue and expenditure of the government. Revenue may be taxes or non-taxes, like the profit of expenditure where government is doing various like education, defense, and so on and so forth. Now, if the revenue is greater than the expenditure, naturally one will have a surplus in your income. Revenue is nothing but the income letter. If every revenue is less than expenditure, then it will be a deficit. One has to borrow it. Like if your income is 1,000 and you are spending more, one has to borrow. And if it is just equal to this, then will be balanced budget. You may ask a question whether countries have experienced this. Balanced budget is theoretical possibility, but recent time, US government, other government, they have a surplus budget. For Clinton time, their revenue was much higher than their expenditure. Most of the developing economies, they have deficit. That is their revenue income is lower than this. Then the question is that if government is spending more than what it is receiving, how government is going to finance it? For example, if somebody like an individual whose income is 1 lakh and is spending more than 1 lakh, naturally one has to borrow. from the banks or other to fill otherwise. So same way government can also finance it. So there are two ways government can finance it. It's a deficit. When I say deficit, it means that its income is less than its expenditure. So so it means that its expenditure is higher than its income. So how? One is that one can borrow. The like individual may borrow from bank, government can borrow like is. So government can borrow through market. Like you may recall that I discussed about the SLR, that the government bond, RBI floats and the banks. So that is why one way is when government floats this, then the banks buy these bond and buy these bond, and the government pays the rate of interest. So government can raise fund via this. If it is proving to insufficient, then government can ask RBI to print currency notes. It is called money finance, inflationary. It is called monetized. It means that you are creating money out of thin air, like a printing press. You create. And I will explain to this part monetize this business. Then, if it is not proven to be sufficient, then external borrowing. Various countries have borrowed externally. They cannot borrow from either the central bank to that level or print, because if you are printing too much, then it will raise the price, and that will create problems. So external borrowing, they have borrowed from the external, maybe IMF or other borrowers from sources. Now the problem with this the borrowing is that if government is borrowing is too much, please remember that borrowing has a cost. You have to pay rate of interest. And I'll come to this point in my last part. Just interest payment is due. It is not free. Government has to pay. You borrow more, so you have to pay more rate of interest. And you retire the old rate, again you borrow. So borrowing from Paul to Peter, sometimes a debt trap is there too much. Now this part, like monetize this, that is the government. You know that in India, Reserve Bank of India can print any amount of currency notes by keeping just 200 crore worth of, one should be 150 gold and crore, and the rest in foreign exchange, any amount of currency note. The current system of currency notes is not that there is a backing of gold, and that earlier till 1971, it has a backing of US dollar. So it is not that you go there and ask that they should be converted into gold. What the RBI will do, that RBI will, if 100 rupee note is there, will replace them. It is a die promise to pay the bearer this much. It only legacy. That promise means that an equivalent 100 rupee note will be given. Now, any central bank will not print unlimited amount, because if you are printing unlimited amount, that it will stoke inflation, and inflation is there, then all the policies and other things will go awry, and government will have to apply break. Otherwise, countries which are war ravaged economies and other like they are monetized deficit is there. So that is why these countries there is high inflation because of that. So I'm printing too much may create inflation. That is why monetized deficit is it's not government has to resort it when all the other avenues are not available. So this is how it is carried out. Now, in recent time, what has happened in India? I will show to you. You see here, this is a recent budget recording. In India, 39% of the revenue, that is current income which government is getting, taxes, all 39% goes towards payment of interest on the previously borrowed loans. What is left? 60%. And in contrast to these other countries, Brazil comes in here. This is a very alarming situation. Interest interest and revenue. So that is why, if you borrow too much, and you see that this ratio, if you are borrowing too much or your current income, you have less amount money available for other things. Naturally, if you are paying out of this, 39%, the rest 61% is there for other purposes. 39% of the income is going for interest payment. So that is why over the years what has happened in India, that because of the financing and other, and moreover recent time it has also surged because of the COVID and other situation, but you know that it is not a matter of, you can see in the graph also. So this is constantly on the rise, from, is going up. So it's a very alarming situation. And in a sense, in some countries, for example, if economy is growing, the revenue, the income will further increase, and this ratio may shrink further. For example, if income increases, this ratio may go down. But you know that retire the old age, the income you have to pay more. So that is why there is a kind of debt trap which is being created in here. So in the last part, just I will tell you that what happens is that the economic policy making is science as well as art. And one important thing inside the applying economic policy like fiscal and monetary is how to use these tools and when to use it. And that requires a good forecasting. And the problem with the forecasting is that forecasting is never accurate. And by the time government takes action, maybe that action may be not needed, or the situation may not. So that is why the economic policy making, when action is taken, that is why I told you there is a lag when you take action and when the finally its effect is transmitted on the real world. Another lag is there, you recognition lag, when one recognizes that there is an issue. So that is why when GDP forecast is there, sometimes average forecast is taken of various agencies and like that. And moreover, accuracy of data is very, very important. What has happened in recent years in India, in order to paint a rosy picture, the data, the data issue, that is the quality of data, has become a major debating point. And if your data is not correct or is not collected, then all the decision which will be based on that will also. For example, if you are saying it is projected that GDP is this much, whereas it is not this much, all policy action will be geared towards that. So even if, let us say that quality of data is, so there are a whole lot of problems in implementation of the economic policies to create an effective counter-cyclical solution for the economy. And as I told you in one of my lectures, that economy, managing economy is not like driving an automobile that can bring back and forth at will. It is like you are driving a giant oil tanker. You can imagine, you can just visualize the oil giant. It takes a long time before it can make the job. So, and sometimes the policymaker are shooting in the dark. They have inaccurate data, or there is a lag in receiving the information, or like that. So, that is why it's both science when you have to, and also when it is to be applied, and like that, and to what extent. So with this, I have briefly covered fiscal policy and some details. Slightly, I have exceeded the time. Normally, I do not do, but still, if you have any question, you can ask. 1 minute.
Sir, as of now, there are no questions.
Okay, note down your.
Thank you.
And if there is any, we will can have a special.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.